NVIDIA's DLSS has been around for a fair bit, offering gamers an option to improve their performance without sacrificing too much in the graphics department. AMD teased their temporal upscaling system, FSR 2.0, and it's finally available. In this video, we're going to take a look at the handful of intrepid gamers who are hacking FSR into DLSS-enabled titles. Buckle in, folks, because this story has a lot of jargon and a lot of acronyms. NVIDIA has definitely established itself at the very cutting edge of graphics processing tech. A lot of their most promising and exciting tech research doesn't even have to do with gaming. Their research into AI and neural networks wasn't supposed to be for gaming necessarily, but gamers can benefit from it through NVIDIA's DLSS features. DLSS stands for Deep Learning Super Sampling, and it makes use of the tensor cores that NVIDIA introduced in their RTX 20 series of graphics cards in 2018. It's a form of temporal upscaling built specifically for NVIDIA's hardware. The first version of DLSS required developers to implement it into their games, but DLSS 2.0 can work with any game. But whenever NVIDIA changes the game for gamers, AMD is never too far behind. Their temporal upscaling algorithm, called Fidelity FX Super Resolution, is now available for developers to put into their games. While AMD claims that FSR is just as good as DLSS, their main selling point for the algorithm is that it's open source and easy to implement in any game that has DLSS. Modders have been proving this point lately by creating their own mods to enable FSR in games. Turns out it's really easy. All gamers have had to do is mess with some registry files and some dynamic libraries, and boom, whenever a game tries to use DLSS, it ends up using FSR instead. This hackery started, naturally, with Cyberpunk 2077, but the list of games that you can FSR into includes Red Dead Redemption 2, Dying Light 2, Metro Exodus, and Guardians of the Galaxy. But we know what you're thinking. DLSS? FSR? Temporal upscaling? That really is a lot of jargon and acronyms. The objective of both DLSS and FSR is basically to allow gamers to do more with less hardware power, or if you've got their highest end graphics cards, go right over the top with them in terms of graphics. They're both algorithms for temporal upscaling. As we move into the decade of the 20s, 1080p is becoming old news. Gamers are looking to have 1440p screens at the very least, and 4K is in fashion. And do you know what else is in fashion? High refresh rates. But in order to run a game at a high res with a high frame rate, you need graphical firepower, and you might not get it from AMD and NVIDIA's lower end offerings. In the past, you'd have to choose between a resolution and frame rate, or get both at a higher expense. But temporal upscaling is a bit of a magic trick. Basically, the GPU itself renders the image at a lower resolution, which it can do faster to get a higher frame rate. This image is then sent through the upscaling algorithm, which basically uses math to generate a higher resolution equivalent of the image without a performance penalty. This allows gamers to play games at 1440p or 4K or even higher, even while their system isn't actually rendering the graphics at those resolutions. Sure, the actual quality isn't as good as if the graphics were natively rendered at that resolution, but it does basically allow gamers to get QHD or 4K at a lower cost. So now that we know what temporal upscaling is, why is it a big deal that AMD's solution can be hacked into games? The rivalry between NVIDIA and AMD is almost as old as the rivalry between AMD and Intel. As the years have passed, the two companies have adopted certain positions in the graphics card market, and consumers have had to deal with how their policies affect the gaming industry. NVIDIA is definitely the bigger company in terms of scale and budget, which they throw into all kinds of research. And when NVIDIA comes out with graphics technology built on that research, they like to ensure that they're the only ones with that capability in the industry. CUDA, PhysX, and OptiX ray tracing are just a few examples of tech that's exclusive to NVIDIA hardware. Companies that want access to those features end up having to cut deals with NVIDIA, which disadvantages AMD and any other companies that don't want to work with NVIDIA, Apple being a major example there. FSR being open source and easy to implement is a big deal because developers won't have many excuses to avoid doing it. If a developer goes out of their way to not include FSR in a game, we'll know for sure that NVIDIA has something to do with it. And in that scenario, it apparently takes minutes to force FSR into a game that doesn't have it. Keep in mind also that both the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox One series use AMD graphics hardware, so that means we can potentially have FSR in our console console games too. That'll help them stand up to games and TVs that are on their way in the coming years. Could companies design their games in a way to make FSR impossible to mod into them? Sure, and it wouldn't be completely out of character for Nvidia to make developers do something like that. But we'll try to stay positive about this news, as today's one more day that gaming is equitable to both Nvidia and AMD fans. Next, in other news, Nvidia has way too high of stock of RTX 30 cards. Now, those are words you'd never thought you'd read or hear, right? But that's what Nvidia said this week. And not just that, they're apparently considering delaying the release of their RTX 40 series so they can move some more of their RTX 30 supply. What a time to be alive. Since the crypto hype took the planet by storm, demand for graphics cards soared. By this time last year, no graphics card was too weak to be thrown into some crypto bros basement mining rig. That had resulted in insane prices for graphics cards on the reseller market. Interest in PC building fell to record lows, and you'll still find PC gamers today running GTX 900 series cards. The crash in the GPU resale market was pretty much expected with the crash of the cryptocurrency market. It's hard to know what the crypto market will look like after this crash though, so if you need to upgrade your graphics, the time to buy is now. Up next, some bad news for AMD. While Nvidia is celebrating the crash of the crypto market, AMD is in a bit of trouble. The ultimate kind of trouble a corporation can face. Their share price is down 5.4%. This dip in their share value comes after a 1-2 punch that AMD has suffered recently. AMD announced at the end of June that they are investigating a potential data breach at the company. This alleged crime was carried out by Ransom House, and the group says that they've pinched a whole 450 gigabytes worth of data thanks to bad passwords at the company. This, on top of the crypto crash tanking AMD's sales, just paints a bad picture for Taiwan's semiconductor titan. As a saving grace, AMD is promising inroads into the enterprise CPU market. Their Ryzen series of processors was a big success for them in the consumer market, but both AMD and Intel know that the real money is in corporate consumers. EPYC and Threadripper took some time to mature into viable products, but interest from businesses is growing. AMD expects to greatly increase their market share in this segment as the year goes on. To close off today's video, a brief history lesson about Apple's beef with Nvidia. When it comes to PC hardware manufacturers, Apple is definitely one of the biggest. Their Macs are insanely popular with consumer and business users, but they haven't put an Nvidia chip in any of their machines in decades. Why is Apple, of all companies, 100% Team Red? It all comes down to CUDA and Apple's new M series processors. You see, Apple had been working on their own silicon for almost a decade while still releasing Intel Macs. Sometimes they had Nvidia graphics and sometimes they went with AMD. But when Nvidia came out with their CUDA tech, that became a problem for Apple. CUDA is a form of hardware acceleration for photo and video editing, as well as 3D rendering. It's the real deal, and companies like Adobe, Autodesk, and Blender were quick to support it. But CUDA was a closed tech, and you could only use it with Nvidia hardware. That was unacceptable to Apple because the chips they were designing have their own integrated graphics. They wanted the industry to continue to support the open source OpenCL, as well as Apple's own Metal API. Their solution was simple: no more Nvidia hardware on Macs. That put software designers in a tough spot. Macs are so commonly used in the same industries that their software targets that they couldn't afford to abandon OpenCL and Metal. Apple wants to keep the rest of the industry on board with OpenCL and Metal, and that's why you'll probably never see an Nvidia chip in an Apple machine again. But Nvidia is still popular in the Windows world, and that'll probably never change. Well, that's it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.